What you're about to hear isn't just another message about kindness and unconditional love. It's a deep dive into the human psyche, revealing a profound truth uncovered by Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychologists in history. After decades of studying the soul, Jung discovered something about human nature that many of us overlook, and it could change the way you perceive yourself, your kindness, and your relationships forever. But this isn't just about psychology. We will also look at this through the lens of Buddhist teachings, which emphasize mindfulness, compassion, and the importance of embracing both our light and our shadow. These ancient teachings complement Jung's ideas and offer us a path toward true transformation, not just for the mind, but for the spirit. Have you ever felt that your kindness is misunderstood? Or that the more you give, the less you receive? If so, this message will explain why. Jung observed something alarming about people who strive to be good. They often end up suffering the most. But what does it mean to be truly good? The idealized image of kindness. In today's society, we have created an idealized image of goodness. The person who is always available, never says no, forgives without hesitation, and constantly puts others before themselves. The modern world tells us that to be good is to sacrifice ourselves for others, to be selfless, to never show anger, frustration, or personal needs. But Jung uncovered something deeply unsettling. This image of goodness is not only wrong, it's dangerous. Jung discovered that when we strive to embody this version of goodness, we inadvertently fuel the shadow within ourselves. The shadow is the hidden part of us that we deny, suppress, and try to bury beneath layers of forced niceness. It's like trying to hold a ball underwater. The harder we push, the stronger it fights to rise to the surface. In Buddhism, the concept of samsara refers to the cycle of suffering that we experience when we refuse to acknowledge our true nature. The idea of trying to always be good without recognizing our limitations or emotions is akin to denying the true self, leading to dissatisfaction and emotional exhaustion. Buddhism teaches us that true metta, loving kindness, is not born out of self-sacrifice but from understanding and accepting both our light and dark sides. Imagine a person who constantly says yes to others' requests. They do so because they believe they are being a good person, a helpful friend, or a caring family member. But over time, they begin to feel drained. Their needs are never considered, their boundaries are ignored, and they feel increasingly resentful. This is the moment when the shadow, the hidden frustration and anger, begins to rise. But they suppress it because they believe being kind means never feeling upset. Jung's message wasn't to abandon kindness. It was about integrating the shadow, embracing the full spectrum of who we are, light and dark, good and bad. Only then can we move from naive kindness to a deeper, more powerful form of love. True kindness isn't about denying our anger, frustration, or limits. It's about acknowledging them and still choosing to act from a place of balance and understanding. Understanding the shadow. Jung's idea of the shadow is not just an abstract concept. It's a real psychological force within us. It's where we hide everything we think is unacceptable. Our anger, our deepest desires, and our right to say no. For those who pride themselves on being kind, the shadow is a terrifying place, because it represents everything they've worked so hard to suppress. The idea that someone who is good could also be angry or assertive seems contradictory. But Jung believed that the shadow was essential for our psychological health. In Buddhism, we often talk about the importance of mindfulness and self-awareness. This includes acknowledging the parts of ourselves that we might prefer to ignore, the anger, the desires, and even the fear. These feelings, when consciously accepted, can become the key to liberation. By acknowledging our shadow, we free ourselves from the suffering caused by denial and repression. Consider someone who prides themselves on being the good one in their family. They never get angry, always help others, and keep the peace. But when their boundaries are crossed, when they feel emotionally drained, they begin to feel resentment. They might not express it openly, but the suppressed anger bubbles up, affecting their emotional health and their relationships. The truth is, the shadow isn't our enemy. It's an essential part of our inner world. By repressing it, we deny our personal power, our ability to set boundaries, and our right to take up space. When we avoid facing the shadow, we also lose parts of ourselves. To embrace true kindness, we must learn to accept and integrate both the light and the dark within us. The paradox of kindness. The more we strive to be perfectly good, the more vulnerable we become to our own shadow. Jung saw this paradox clearly when we reject our anger and our right to say no. We become passive-aggressive. When we deny our need for recognition, we become manipulators. When we pretend we don't need anything, we can become emotional vampires, draining others. The Buddha taught that attachment leads to suffering. When we are attached to the idea of being good all the time, we suffer because we suppress parts of ourselves that are natural and necessary. In Buddhist teachings, dukkha refers to the unsatisfactory nature of life when we refuse to accept its impermanent and complex nature. True freedom and kindness arise when we accept both our dark and light sides. Picture someone who always says yes to every request, no matter how small or inconvenient. They do so out of a desire to be kind. But over time they feel increasingly resentful and exhausted. They might start to become passive-aggressive, maybe they stop responding to requests, or they grumble about the burden they are carrying. In this way, their kindness has been twisted into something harmful, because they haven't addressed their own needs and boundaries. Jung's wisdom here is clear. True kindness is not about denying our negative feelings or ignoring our boundaries. It's about understanding that our emotions, including anger, frustration, and sadness, are valid and important. True kindness arises when we integrate our shadow, when we acknowledge our darkness, and transform it into conscious wisdom. The dangers of blind kindness. Blind kindness, the kind that disregards personal needs in favor of others, can lead to emotional exhaustion, resentment, and unbalanced relationships. It often stems from a deep-rooted fear, the fear of rejection, of conflict, and of not being loved for who we truly are. This fear can turn into a form of self-sacrifice, where we give away not only our time and energy, but essential parts of our identity. In Buddhism, the practice of right effort, one of the Noble Eightfold Path, teaches us to cultivate a balance between effort and ease. Overgiving and sacrificing oneself for others without awareness is not in line with right effort. True compassion involves understanding one's limits and caring for oneself as well as for others. Think of someone who has always been the caretaker in their family. They take care of everyone else's needs but neglect their own. Over time, they begin to feel isolated and invisible. Despite giving everything to their loved ones, they feel that no one sees or appreciates their efforts. This leads to a deep loneliness, even when surrounded by people. When kindness becomes compulsive, when we give out of fear rather than love, we lose touch with our true self. We become like an empty vessel, existing solely to fulfill the needs of others. This leads to burnout, resentment, and a gradual erosion of our personal power. Embracing the shadow for true kindness. The transformation from naive kindness to true kindness begins when we acknowledge and integrate the shadow. This doesn't mean rejecting kindness or love. It means learning to embrace all parts of ourselves, the light and the dark, and finding balance. It means understanding that our anger, our limits, and our needs are just as important as our ability to give to others. The Buddha often spoke about the need to balance compassion with wisdom. In the Dhammapada, it says, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but by love alone." This refers to the wisdom of not suppressing anger, but understanding it and using it with compassion. To be truly compassionate, we must first be compassionate to ourselves and our own needs. Consider a person who has spent their life putting others first, never saying no, always helping, even at the expense of their own needs. Over time, they realize they have neglected themselves. They feel exhausted, drained, and resentful. The turning point comes when they begin to set boundaries, saying no when necessary and taking time for self-care. This change, though uncomfortable at first, allows them to rediscover their sense of self-worth and their true capacity for kindness. True kindness comes from a place of strength, not weakness. It's about being able to say no when necessary, about setting boundaries, and about prioritizing self-care without guilt. The more we integrate the shadow, the more authentic and powerful our kindness becomes. The path to true power. The path to true kindness requires embracing both light and shadow. As Jung taught us, the real transformation occurs when we stop fighting against our dual nature and start integrating it consciously. When we accept our anger, our need for boundaries, and our vulnerability, we discover a new kind of strength. It's not about being perfect, it's about being whole. This is the true meaning of kindness. To be whole, to integrate both our light and our shadow, and to live authentically. When we do this, we not only find our true power, but we also empower others to do the same. If this message resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Together, let's walk the path of transformation. Let's embrace both our light and our shadow and become whole.